Fantastic. We're gonna have a little touch of a transition here. I'm gonna turn this camera off and turn on the one that's looking at the unit, okay? So I can do a demonstration.
Perfect. Yes.
All right, give me 1 second. I gotta move around the room real quick.
No problem. Yeah. I was on a very interesting webinar with RaySecur earlier, so it's great to see. You have the floor, Will.
All right. Again, Will Plummer. I'm the CSO for RaySecur, and we're gonna talk about threats today. So we really like to cover things that are physical threats. We listened to a lot of security about cyber stuff for the last little bit. That really doesn't revolve around our world. Things you can touch, tangible items. That's what we tend to focus on. So the first thing, I got about 15 minutes. I'm going to try to make sure we don't cut off Alex, my CEO, who's behind me. We're going to talk about real threats, and the first thing is we're talking about mmWave. So this is an X-ray. It's not ionizing. There's no radiation. There's nothing that is going to, it's not ionized radiation. There's nothing going to hurt you, and it basically can be used by any operator. So as I go through, there's a couple of things that really need to be brought out. One is you can stick your hands in it, and that's not a danger. The second thing is, if you ever done any radiography work, when you do anything that's with an X-ray, the most important thing that you have to identify is the distance between what you're trying to capture and the imager itself. So the imager is what your image is being pulled off of. So if you take a picture of something through an X-ray or even through a mmWave system, most of them, if you change that distance, a highlighter inside of your backpack becomes a baseball bat. So with this, you see me throw things in and around here. It's collimated light, so it's not going to change. It's going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. It's just the way this thing looks, and it's something that might be useful. The second thing is there's my hand on a 1-to-1. The second thing you'll see me throw over here is that's my finger. So there's a 3-to-1 zoom. When I move things around, it's just something everybody needs to see. So we train our clients and people that use our system, threats, no threats, and then we back it up with a program that basically has somebody like myself. I have 25 years of explosive force disposal background, and they can reach back and get somebody like me. So what we do is make sure that they know enough to get enough of hands-on to go normal, hey, abnormal, let's call somebody. And that does a lot of work. It actually helps out quite a bit. So the first thing we show everybody is normal. This is what a normal package should look like when it goes to any of your primaries, if you're doing EP work or whatever. All the lines make sense. Everything is straight. There's nothing that stands out. That's the adhesive strip at the back. That's normal, okay? Abnormal, when it starts showing up in your GSOC or whatever you're doing, is stuff like this. So the anthrax threats in 2001, those were 2,500 to 5,000 milligrams in each one of those letters. That's powder, mustard powder, whatever they choose to put into it. The reason why is because anthrax, for example, is 2 microns in size. If you open that package up, you want something that's going to transfer that. It's a carrier of the threat. So the real world that comes out nowadays, anthrax hasn't been around for a while, is somebody's going to send a white powder bed into your facility. It's going to look a lot like this. It's going to be overblown. You're going to see a large amount of powder, things that move around, and things that are hard to capture in an X-ray. Just because X-ray doesn't really get down into lower amounts of density as well, and it's kind of hard to actually move things. So if you X-ray that, you're going to say, it looks a little odd, and most likely it'll pass through. If you're looking at some of the other things we're seeing in today's world, drugs are becoming more and more common. Today, the drug dependency rate among corporate America is 16% higher than it was. Well, it's 60% like it was 16 years ago. So it's actually on the rise. When you're looking for fentanyl threats, powders, things that are not necessarily trying to get your facility emptied out, like there's several events that have happened last year. In fact, there was one today in Ireland where their health department was emptied out because of white powder threat. When you're looking at smaller events, that's just what they look like. 50 milligrams, about the size of half an aspirin, crushed up. Today's world is fentanyl, carfentanil, gray death, or whatever the new one is. But that's meant to actually get through inside of your jail, whatever facility you're running through, or get to somebody that wants to get it in their hands. So the same thing, straight lines, everything makes sense until you get into a corner. And once you get there, these things just kind of move around a little bit. So that threat's up and coming. And then another one that's really starting on the rise is liquid drugs or liquid, basically contaminants are trying to get through. So this is about 2 tablespoons of liquid inside of a container. You'll see this today when it comes to people trying to get liquid coke, liquid meth, In smaller packages, they'll go through a seal meal or something as simple as that, because you can put that inside the container, then decontaminate it, and when you push it into a facility that has a swab test, it's never seen any powder at all, so it'll get through. It won't be coming in. Something's been captured. Other threats that we see, so those were liquid and powders. If you start looking at physical, tangible threats to individuals, like you're trying to get somebody to just cut themselves, like razor blades, things of that type, they're becoming a fairly common. Low-grade threats, people just trying to be menacing, a lot of times around jails and prisons. One of the things that this thing works really well on is things like 3D weapons, 3D printing. So a mmWave is non-ionizing, so it's not going to go through a metal gun, and I'll show you one in a second. But what it does do is pick up items that is softer. So this is, for example, a nylon knife. No issue. It's not something that we're going to have an issue picking up, or a mmWave system have an issue picking up, but it's something that might get through on other elements because there's no metal contact to it. When you start looking at items that have to be x-rayed or checked at a certain angle, the ability to move them around actually helps quite a bit. So if you imagine a bunch of mail going through, and everybody, you've seen it in the post office, all those letters are jammed in vertically, and usually x-ray systems or other systems shoot vertically. We're doing it. We're shooting up and down. For a couple reasons, x-ray is dangerous. So you want x-ray energy going up into the ceiling and away from people, and not in an area where everybody's going to stand and work all day long. But so if you push them all vertically, you're not going to see something. The ability to kind of turn things around and take a look at it from another angle tends to assist the operators, not just with obvious items like a metal gun or something that's in the mail or something that you're trying to inspect, but because they can interact with the item a bit better and get a better feeling. Oftentimes, instead of being, hey, we need to call 911 if it's an extreme, or we need to call somebody else, take a look at this, they can look at it and go, hey, this is tea bags. And I've seen tea bags before. I just need to see it from another angle. So it tends to help out. One of the things that's going through corporate America today is something called worshipping. If you haven't heard of it, it's trying to get listening devices or attempting to get technology into a facility and have it just sit and listen. So you mail it in a package that's benign or appears to be benign. You put it inside of something that just goes inside near a printer, for example, and picks up packets of data. All those have passwords. They have more information than we really want. The package itself then collects all that data and just retransmits it outside of the facility. So somebody's sitting in a wall or close to your perimeter and simply picks up what's going on. So a package that comes through that has some strange densities in it, much like this one, you take a look and you can examine through it. You go, all right, that's dense. Wires running through this thing. That's another dense item. That looks an awful lot like an antenna, just sitting inside of it. And that's as simple as what they are. It's an antenna with a power source and an Arduino that's pushing a Bluetooth or pushing a Wi-Fi image. And then the final thing we'll talk about real quick before we have questions is if you have a full-blown suspect IED or suspect package. Like I said, our program that we run supports our clients so that they can reach back and talk to somebody like myself. But what we expect them to do is spend 15 to 20 seconds or a good maybe 30 seconds identifying the threat. Capture the image and just take a video of it. This is obviously a pipe bomb, other end cap. And that's it. We reach into the package, take a look remotely, take the video out, cut the MPEG into JPEGs, make a mosaic, and really examine what's going on. The entirety of this is going on with everybody in an area that's not being exposed to a threat. So what we've done is put the security individuals in play in the decision-making process. The mailroom just doesn't walk out and call 911. Everybody gets more information and you can make an informed decision. If it does come to the point where you have to call 911 or you have to call your emergency responders or however your local facility is set up, you have video inside, video outside. We have a good example of what it is, and we've already given them an estimate. We have a red beta gamma detector that says whether they have radiation or not, and a camera that tells you whether or what exactly the image it looks like from the outside. So when the bomb squad and somebody like myself shows up, you hand them all this information. Instead of walking into your facility with disarmor, explosives, and everything else that they're probably going to carry in, it'll most likely be a rope and a hook. And at that point, you get your facility back in 2 hours instead of 2 days, because it's not necessarily going to be an evidence issue. It's going to be more along the lines of personal security, safety. Let us collect this stuff and get going. So that pushes me up to time. Is there any questions?
Hi, yes, thanks, Will. I'll just have a look. Jeff asks, all right, and I think this is quite reflective of the audience as well. How could an EP team on the move use it? Because you know we've got a corporate audience which is static and another mobile.
So we have a lot of EP team customers. So that's a great question. This thing runs on 10, 12, 120, or 110 and 220. We have it in the back of Suburbans. We've even worked through the back of Learjets and Gulfstreams. A lot of where it gets used is wherever the primary is going to. We've got a couple of our clients that every time the primary, for example, hosts a board meeting or hosts a party, all the presents get screened before they go in. We say veil because primarily that's where it's at, but it also does have a point security function. It's non-ionizing, like I said, so you can put it anywhere. Plug it in, wait 5 minutes, it's good to go. And you don't have any certification requirements, and there's nothing in it that actually has to train anybody on, just its simple use.
Yeah, no, it was great to see your colleague Eric brought it to our London event in January, so it's really great to see. Are you getting to take it out and about even a little bit these days, or are you doing mostly virtual demonstrations?
We're doing mostly virtual demonstrations. We've done a couple of installations locally, and honestly, a lot of our installations have turned into virtual. Instead of doing 3 hours on site with the team, it's a couple 1-hour sessions, and we have an LMS platform that supports the training aspect behind it. But most security people need about 20 minutes, and they look at us and go, "Yeah, I got it. Let's go." It's not a very difficult task, and once you kind of get the knack for it, it's easy.
I like it, and Lee says super cool piece of kit, and I remember seeing your demonstration last week. We had Martin from AS on the call, so that was really good. How I think we've got a minute left. How would people actually train on this? Is it, you say it's simple, but would they have to sit down and do a desk-based piece of work?
So we have a learning management system platform that starts from beginning to end with the mail operators, and that takes an hour and a half. But that's more of an explanation as to why they're doing it. Most mailroom handlers don't have the security background to say, "Hey, my back door is open and something's getting into my facility. Let's screen this." So that's one way of doing it. We have one-on-one sessions that we do with all of our new clients. And then in that, there's a train the trainer program that we kind of push through with the security leads. So a security lead takes an hour with us. We show them some advanced training on it. We do a little bit back and forth. And then they essentially, when they need to train somebody else, they reach back out to us, do a check ride, make sure they're good, and then they can do a train the trainer with their own people.
Perfect. I like it. Train the trainer. Get it multiplied. But yes, now we are out of time, and I don't want to cut into Alex's time, but this is great because now, of course, we're going to be talking about the topic, but people will have this in the back of their mind, realizing just how easy maybe it can be solved. So yeah, Will, thank you very much.
Very much. Thank you, everybody.
Will, a round of applause. Fantastic. And so, obviously, thank you to RaySecur for that fantastic demonstration. And as I say, we like to spice it up, make it more engaging, and RaySecur has definitely helped us do that. And now I'm going to welcome to the stage Alex Sapok. I can see a couple of different Alex Sapoks, so let me just hope this is the correct one. We're going to look at understanding the importance of protecting the edge of your corporate infrastructure, the evolution of mail screening and corporate security modernization. Alex, can you hear me? I can see a presentation. Would you like me to invite the other accountant?
Here we go, Phil. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It's all good.
Excellent. It looks like you may not be seeing me on the screen, but if you can hear me and see my presentation, I think we're most of the way there.
Yeah, I can see it. If you maximize it, then you're ready to go.
All right, excellent. Let's do that, and then we'll kick off the presentation. Perfect. All right, hopefully everybody can see the screen. Again, Phil, thank you very much for the opportunity to present here to the group this afternoon. You know, it's been a really fantastic discussion to follow throughout the day. I think it touches on so many broad topics, including the convergence of physical and cyber, the risk of insider threats, the need to be proactive and also reactive. And I think we'll talk about all of those within the context of a specific threat vector facing both corporate organizations and high-risk individuals, which includes mail screening. And really, you know, talk through both the extent of the problem and, as you saw in the demonstration, new technologies that are able to very effectively and simply address some of these issues as well. So in terms of mail security, it's first important to really understand the problem and put the problem in context. And from an organizational standpoint, we really see mail security as one of the last major physical security gaps. And as we talked about earlier today, our organizational security is only as strong as its weakest link. So if we have gaps on the physical side, that exposes vulnerabilities on the cyber side and vice versa. So if we kind of just think about this for a second, you know, if we walk into most typical corporate organizations, the front door is very well protected. So what that means is, you know, we're typically caught on camera before we even open the lobby door. There may be multiple levels of security, of checkpoints, access control, interaction with security personnel. And oftentimes if we're a visitor, we're actually being greeted and brought in by somebody who knows we're coming. And if you can kind of also think about on the cyber side, basically 100% of all emails that we receive are scanned for threats before we receive them. But if we take a look at how the mail typically enters our organization, oftentimes the back door is wide open. So we have mail items, packages that may be expected, they may be unexpected. And typically somebody pulls up to the back door, drops off a bag or a carton of items, and they may get into the organization and delivered to the intended recipient without even a second glance. I know we've got a number of cyber folks in the audience today, and maybe to drive the point home even further, it's interesting, if you Google mail security, Google will autocorrect and only show you email security. All right, so that kind of illustrates the gap that we're dealing with and the nature of the problem. To put that problem now into perspective and really understand the magnitude, according to some recent industry surveys, 1 in 3 Fortune 500 companies get at least one mail threat each year, and 1 in 5 get 3 or more. Right? And the vast majority of those often go unreported. But there are some that make it up and trickle up through both the USPS and ATF and bomb data centers. So for the publicly available data that we have from these organizations, we've got about 3,500 suspicious powder incidents, liquid incidents that happen each and every year, according to the US Postal Service. And within the US Postal Service Inspectional Services Division, you've got about 400 folks that are specially trained just to investigate and track down these kind of events. And then if we look at kind of the ATF said data in the US Bomb Data Center, the data there is a little bit dated, but in 2018, we had almost 7,500 suspicious package incidents and a little over 2,000 involving letters and parcels. Right? But if we put that public data in the context of, you know, what we're seeing in the commercial domain, the number of threats received by large organizations is significantly greater than what we often may hear through official channels. So it's one thing to look at the statistics, it's another to kind of put those into context and make those real. So I just kind of pulled out a couple recent events that hit the news over the last couple months. And they kind of fall into 3 general categories. On one hand, we're now in the midst of a COVID economic, societal, business, health crisis. And that is elevating the risk profile for a number of organizations. And one example here is coming from Subway headquarters, following a round of layoffs, received a white powder incident in the mail. in the end of May. You've got another sort of bucket of mail-related risks within the context of our current political climate. So there's a lot of heated debate about mail-in voting, absentee voting, certainly a lot of concern around that with the anthrax incidents over 20 years ago, and we're starting to see some of that come back. And that was highlighted here in a recent NPR article. And even in my hometown of Boston, 2 years ago, we had a polling station that was shut down due to white powder sent in an absentee ballot. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got contraband, sort of as Will mentioned, you know, people trying to get illicit items through the mail stream. I think many of us probably saw the seeds coming unexpectedly from China, but more importantly, the international mail stream has now long been known as sort of the preferred shipping mechanism for drugs coming into the US as well. So we have a whole broad range, and if we take a look at some of these examples just from the last couple of months, that kind of makes these statistics a little bit more real as well and highlights the extent of the problem. So now that we've kind of defined the problem, we need to understand what are really the key vulnerabilities and major threat vectors that we need to be concerned with. And at the end of the day, if you look at the threats coming in the mail facing most large organizations, these are not the large letter bombs of 15, 20 plus years ago, but rather small threats with no chain of custody. So it's pretty much anything that's a ½ inch thick or less, that weighs less than 10 ounces, that you can anonymously deposit in a curbside drop box. And the anonymous here is the key. Because anything bigger, you typically have to go into a counter, the post office or FedEx or UPS. You're caught on camera, you're filling out a bill of lading or a shipping, swiping your credit card at the counter. So it's the small items that are really the largest risk. And that also informs us of the nature of the threats that we can expect due to the size of those items. And they often also exhibit some unusual characteristics that, if we know what to look for, can help us in mitigating this and preventing these threats from being received by their intended targets. Now, in the past, the chain of custody was pretty clear. If you dropped something off at FedEx, or if you ordered something from a supplier or a vendor, it would have been delivered by the Postal Service, UPS, FedEx, DHL, and a small number of service providers. And that model is changing very rapidly. So 10 years ago, you might have thought it suspicious if somebody pulled up to your home in an unmarked Toyota Corolla and just walked up to your front porch and dropped off an item. Today, that's now commonplace, right? We're crowdsourcing our last mile delivery. We've got Uber and a number of other providers that are increasingly stepping in to make sure that people get stuff faster and more efficiently. But that also opens us up both to risk and a feeling of complacency. So as I mentioned, 10 years ago, something that would have aroused suspicion, now nobody bats an eye at that. Within our organizations, we've got local courier services, bike messengers in urban areas dropping things off throughout the day. Got crowdsourced service providers arriving in unmarked cars with no credentials, part of the gig economy in between other jobs dropping off items. And that's normal, right? That in many cases, it doesn't arouse nearly the level of suspicion that it would, and then opens the door for threats to enter our organization. If you look at some of the statistics based on some of the last mile sort of outsourced delivery, you've got about almost a quarter that are non-compliant with the what would have been industry shipping norms in terms of being credentialed and authorized and licensed for these kinds of things. So again, being cognizant of how this environment is changing also reinforces the need to look at things, and not just people, but also things coming into the organization with a critical eye, and really emphasizes the need for scanning and having a robust security program in place. So now that we know kind of where the threats are coming from, it's also important to take a look at the various types of threats. In years past, the threats we're most concerned with might have been larger items, Things like weapons, which are certainly still a concern. People shipping weapons into secure facilities is certainly one way of getting past checkpoint security. But things like explosives and larger shipments of contraband, when you're talking about pounds or kilograms of things, are becoming less common. And it's really small quantities of predominantly things like powder threats, liquids, chemical and biological agents that are the types of threats that are received most often and also the most difficult to detect using conventional scanning technologies. So the threats that you see here listed are highlighted in blue. These larger items are things that are great candidates for X-ray detection. It's the items in red that are we'll call softer items that are also shipped in smaller quantities. That is, Will mentioned, X-ray has a tough time picking up these soft kind of items, especially in these tiny quantities, and that's the reason that 3,500 are making it through, according to the U.S. Postal Service, each and every year to their intended targets. And it's also important to keep in mind that many of these are hoaxes. In fact, the vast majority are hoaxes. But hoaxes can do serious damage as well. While they may not cause direct physical harm to the target, you're still looking at shutting down facilities, evacuating folks, having a full-blown hazmat response, lost productivity, revenue to the company, and certainly the emotional toll that that takes on the recipients of those threats as well. And in addition to these, what I'll call more sort of conventional or well-known types of threats, is one that I wanted to touch on in a bit more detail. And that's one that you saw in Will's demo as well, which is this new threat vector, which is called warshipping. And this came out of some research identified by IBM at Black Hat last year. And it really, as you saw in the demo, is a small electronic device. You can buy these components for less than $100 from online vendors or your local sort of hobbyist electronics store. It typically consists of some sort of a Wi-Fi component, a cellular 3G, 4G system, a battery pack, and some circuitry. And you can conceal this in packing material, in the walls of cardboard boxes, or within items that are shipped into facilities. And once they make it on site, they sort of enable somebody to perpetrate sort of a man-in-the-middle attack. So you access the company, the organization's network, and you start to intercept data that way and transmit it to the outside. So some of the things that, it's important to be aware of these types of new threat vectors that start to bridge the gap between both the physical and the cyber aspects of our security. But also, how can we mitigate these? What can we do to counteract these kind of threats? So from the mail side, one is certainly to process things quickly. Don't let things pile up and sit within your organization. Ideally, you should be processing things as they're received. Scanning for anomalies, as you saw, if you run the mail through a scanning system, ideally to be able to pick up something like this. And then last but not least, discard the packaging quickly. Don't hang on to old boxes or let cardboard and packing material pile up. Get it out of the organization facility as quickly as possible as well. So given that background on the extent of the problem, the types of threats that we can expect, how can we then start to take measures to prevent these from happening or catch them as they're coming in the door? One place to start is U.S. Department of Homeland Security, which puts out mail security guidelines for both the public and the private sector. So this kind of defines call it the standard of care, or the reasonable standard of care, kind of the minimum requirements for addressing these kinds of vulnerabilities. And what this guideline says and what it applies to are basically identifying 12 and actually 13 at-risk industries that are at high risk for receiving mail-borne threats. And you can see those range here from banking and financial institutions to transportation to health and medical facilities and others. So these industries translate to 2.7 million unique facilities or sites across the US. And then according to the Homeland Security guidance, you've got a number of criteria that you need to screen for, depending on the type of facility. I won't go into details here, but I just wanted to call out that regardless of the type of facility, whether it's an office or an R&D lab, there's three things that you need to be screening for. So a visual screening, looking for dangerous contraband, and then hoaxes, which again are the most common types of mail threats. And most of these are, the powder type or some type of liquid threat. So this applies to all those facilities, and it really reminds us that we need to, if we're not thinking about it, we really need to be thinking about it in order to meet these kind of minimum thresholds. And now when we take that guidance and we contrast that with the reality of securing an entire organization, we now need a solution that can be flexible and scale. And I think there's been really no greater example of the need for flexibility than the current COVID pandemic. So what we have with COVID, first and foremost, is a low probability but high impact event, which in many cases is just like a mail threat coming into the organization, generally low probability, but can certainly be high impact. And the need to be flexible and adapt. So now you've got key executives, key employees working remotely. How are you protecting them? How are your security processes evolving as you now have this distributed workforce? And we talked about a little bit about that earlier on the call in the context of cyber. Additionally, you've got a large organization across a number of geographies. So for a typical Fortune 500 company has over 300 locations globally. And the risk profile for those locations may vary. You've got some high risk locations, whether they're corporate headquarters, data centers, R&D or manufacturing centers, medium risk satellite offices, and then a number of low risk facilities as well. So how do your protocols from a mail standpoint, each of those facilities typically receiving mail, how does that scale across those sites? So you're not just putting a deadbolt lock on the front door, but leaving all the other sites unprotected. So that's an important consideration. So with that in mind, we've kind of put together what we call the 5 pillars of mail security, or 5 key aspects that apply to any organization and that can be adaptable to the needs of that organization. The first certainly hinges on people, both our internal people and our external support resources. The second are standard operating procedures. So do we have processes in place across the organization so that no matter who is doing the mail screening or where they're doing it, they're adhering to the same high quality standards? We need a training program to make sure that people are educated on those procedures and they're continually reinforced and updated as the threat picture evolves. As we mentioned, powder threats and warshipping being a recently new threat. Making sure we're using the right screening tools for the job, the right technology set, and then that we have a response plan in place to deal with threats when they do come up. And so I'll spend the rest of the next couple of minutes really just touching on 2 key areas of this. One being, the people aspect, and the other being the technology. And then on the technology side, as you saw in the demo, it's really making sure that it's the right tool for the job at hand. I've got a toolbox at home that's full of tools I never touch because they're too unique or too cumbersome to use. There's a couple that are go-to I use, for most things that I'm working on. It should be the same with mail screening. We want to use the right tool to screen for the types of threats that we need, that we're most concerned with. And as we're implementing that, again, going back to standardized processes and technologies, drawing here from the UK mail security guidelines, again, focused on the fact that powder threats are the most prevalent. We explicitly call out in the UK guidelines the fact that white powders, which are the most common form of mail hoaxes, are typically undetected by X-ray based screening processes, particularly in the quantities that they're shipped in. And that's another reason why the mail system continues to be the main source for drug transport. So that really brings us to the fact that from a tool and a problem standpoint, we've got a mismatch here. You've got a sledgehammer to drive a nail in the wall, and it's not maybe necessarily the right tool for the job. And if you look at the technology recommended for different threats, again, from Homeland Security, you'll see that most common mail-borne threats, which are suspicious powders, chemical and biological agents, very difficult to detect with any one given technology. And in fact, that the tool that most organizations reach for, being X-ray scanning, really is not well suited for looking at these kinds of threats, in contrast to explosives and other dangerous items. So that really takes us to what new technologies can we identify that are very well suited to these kind of problems, looking for these more soft targets or soft threats coming in the mail stream, whether they're small electronic devices or powders. And that leads us into mmWave imaging. What you're seeing here is just a depiction of the electromagnetic spectrum. On one side, you've got X-ray and sort of ionizing radiation. On the other side, you've got radio waves and microwaves, gigahertz type frequencies that our cell phones and Wi-Fi systems are operating on. But in the middle, you've got the terahertz range, and there's a gap there because historically, it's been very difficult to develop terahertz technologies. So those kinds of technologies have been limited in the past, primarily to, satellite imaging and other high-end instrumentation applications. But what we've been able to do at RaySecur is really leverage these capabilities that have been developed for defense applications and apply them to really develop a scalable security imaging system. And as you saw in the demo, some of the key advantages to mmWave imaging is the fact that it gives you X-ray-like abilities, the ability to see through an object, and that's what you're seeing here in the animation. Right? This is a box, a plastic box, that in real life you can't see through, but by holding it in the scanner, you're able to see right through it. And the fact that it's safe, there's no radiation, there's no permitting, it's as easy to deploy in Chicago as it is in Singapore. Right? There's no international requirements that hinge on being able to successfully deploy these systems. The other thing is the fact that this type of imaging, because you can interact with it, it's dynamic, it's intuitive. It's the way that we interact with objects in our everyday life. When you pick up an object, you don't quite know what's on the back side of it, you just turn it over and you look at the back. And in a system like this, that's really what you do. You're looking at something from one perspective, you don't quite understand what it is, you just rotate it, you move it. And so it makes it very, very easy for our teams to use. A couple additional examples that you saw in Will's demo as well. Certainly we're seeing the same kind of conventional threats, the guns and the weapons, but also the liquids and the powders. And one of the reasons it's so easy to see things like powders and liquids, especially in small quantities, is the fact that you're seeing them moving. If you're holding an envelope in the field of view, if you're holding a package in the field of view, you're seeing the grains of powder moving on the screen or the liquid moving. So you really don't need any training to hold something in the field of view and know sort of what you're looking at. And most likely, if it's mail going to accounting, it probably shouldn't be there, and you might want to, call somebody. But even the best tools and technology really aren't worth much if we don't have sort of the right human expertise behind them. So that depends both on our local teams that are using the systems, but it also allows us to leverage IoT capabilities, network capabilities to provide access to experts on demand. And if we look at kind of where we're headed as an industry, being able to not only collect the data, but make sense of the data in real time so that we can react accordingly is extremely important. So by being able to push a button on the device and have somebody, like Will with 25 years of military EOD experience, looking at exactly what, somebody across the world might be looking at and giving an expert second opinion is invaluable to quickly either de-escalating or escalating the situation and dealing with it accordingly. And then lastly, ideally, we'd like to be able to prevent threats before they occur. And as I think we talked about, earlier in the sessions today, we've got, insider threats in the case of mail. It's a great example. Revenge is one of the key motivators according to the U.S. Postal Inspection Services. Generally, it's an employee, disgruntled employee, a customer, somebody close to the organization. And being overt about our mail security, letting people know that everything coming in is being screened, just like when you get off a flight, and you got that TSA sticker, inside your carry-on luggage, knowing that the mail is being screened is a great way to deter these kind of events in the first place. So with that, I'll wrap up. I think, in terms of closing the mail security gap, we want to identify the problem, make sure we're able to protect our back door, understand that this bridges both the physical and the cyber, understand what our risks are, what the most likely threats are, how we can implement a holistic solution, and making sure we've got the right tools for the tasks and that they are adhering to the highest and most and validated standards. So with that, I'll wrap up. I think I've run against my time and happy to take any questions if we've got time for them.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much, Alex, and yeah, thanks to RaySecur for supporting this event, and also our London one here back in January. We have a question in the audience. Jeff asks, is there any scope for automated identification using the system? I guess that's thinking of the human fallibility of looking at the screen. Is that some possible development?
Yeah, great question. And I see my camera has finally kicked into action here. So it's great to see everyone virtually. Good question. Our philosophy around mail security really hinges on detection as opposed to identification. I think that's a big distinction. Within most organizations, it's if you see a powder in an envelope and you've called the recipient, they haven't ordered it, they're not expecting it. Do you really need to identify the fact that this is anthrax, or do you want to take it out of your facility and have the experts handle that? So on the detection side, from an imaging standpoint, we certainly are working on automated tools to be able to flag things like powders and liquids, but as opposed to identification, that is something that would leave to the forensics labs and law enforcement.
No, I like that. Otherwise, you'd have people opening things. You wouldn't want that. No, I like that. And so how would someone go about engaging you? Would they get you to bring them a system, a trial? Would they rent it? Would they buy it? What would they have to do?
Yeah, so I think if we look at where we're heading at as an industry, and what we're doing is we're really providing a solution. Right? We're providing a solution to mitigate and deter these kinds of threats. So it's the technology is a piece of it, as we talked about, but it's the human expertise and some of the software that's driving it that's a key part of that. So today we offer this as a subscription. So just like you would subscribe to something that includes, all of the remote support, 24/7 access to EOD experts like Will. When your team has got a question, they're right there dialed into the system to provide that support. So it really is a complete solution based on a subscription. And that's kind of how we service our enterprise customers today.
Brilliant. No, I like that. And I think there's, something as a service, it's really the popular method at the moment. So so people will like that. Well, yeah, we are now out of time, but this is fantastic because obviously we're well into spicing up the format. So we've had a demonstration and the presentation to shape that corporate security edge. So Alex, thank you very much, and thank you to RaySecur. I know there's a couple of colleagues in the audience. Thank you, Nancy, and previously, thank you, Will. It's been a pleasure. Let's give Alex a virtual round of applause.
Excellent. Thanks, Phil. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I'll see you back in the audience.
Excellent.
Fantastic, and please do keep those comments coming with the hashtag physical cyber. We've got some nice tweets going on, and as well as LinkedIn. Let me just get myself nicely in focus so you can see me. Fantastic. And thank you, of course, to our wonderful supporter, RaySecur, for supporting this event. Please do check out their website, have a look, and see how we can work more closely together. A couple of shout outs in the audience. I can see Pamela is there. Hi, Pamela. Nice to see you. Pamela's very kindly helped since the outset. We still got some colleagues all the way from the beginning, which is really good. Oh, hello, Bill. Bill's still there. Russell, we got the mug on its way to you, so that's really good. Jay is still there. Greetings to Denver. James is there. James, I think you've been to everyone, which is really good. Brian. There's 3 Brians. Fantastic. Brian, very popular name today. I thought I'd do a bit of a name call because obviously you, the audience, make the event. And hi Pamela, I got your message. That's really good. You make the event. So even here with this panel, let me be your champion. You got a question? Get me to say it. Get me to do a bit of a shout out. We can't physically be in Phoenix at the moment, but it's nice to have the community together because this is the 4th annual. So that's really nice. Before we move to our next panel, I will remind you, if you would like a commemorative mug just like this, I'll post you one. Just email me your address. I'll only use it to post you the mug. It's not for any other reason. And a couple of people have already done that. Today, we have experienced demonstrations. We've had fireside chats. We've had one-on-ones. We've had panel discussions, presentations, videos. And let's go now to the world of the architect, because on the cyber side, the architect has sometimes been on the receiving end of purchases, and there's a common thread to our panels where we wonder if they should get a seat at the table, so to say. So I'm just bringing up all our panelists, and then I will introduce them. Some of our fantastic panelists on this panel have been here the whole time, so thank you very much for that. Christy, nice to see you. How are you doing? I think you're on mute.
Oh, I am. Hi.
How have you enjoyed the day so far?
Been a busy day, but it's been productive, so can't complain.
Fantastic. And we've got David. So there, 1, 2, 3, and yes, nice to see you, Daniel. You've been there since the beginning event back in 2017, I think. How are you doing, Daniel? Oh, you're on mute at the moment. Daniel, you're on mute. Okay, fantastic. So let me just check. We have Randy Newman, cybersecurity GRC expert at Allstate. We have David Cross, Principal Security Architect at Henry Schein One. Welcome. We have Dr. John Raris Almasan, who is AVP Executive Leadership